Okay, I have finished Imperial Elegy. See there, turn marker on turn 7. I went ahead and I think I did one video, or one turn for my first video, one turn for my second video, 2 turns for my third video, and then just blitzed through the last 3 turns for my fourth video. So I just was able to play faster at that point, and really move through the bots. And not enough was happening per turn that I needed a 25-minute video to sum up all of the happenings. So where did it end up? The Russian bot rather ended up winning with 10 victory points. The way the bots work for the national goals is that they draw all of theirs at the end of the game. And if you're playing the quote-unquote easy bots, you draw 3 national goal cards, just like the players would. You can make the bots harder by drawing more national goal cards at the end of the game. That gives the bots more chances to score points. But I chose the easy bots and still lost. The Russians were kind of kicking ass the whole game, and the whipping boy turned out to be the Ottomans. I think the Russians fought 2 Russo-Turkish wars through their home card, and they won both of them. With the second one, you can see here, they ended up taking Istanbul. And the bots, in terms of fighting wars, what happened was, and this was on turn 5, I think, that in fact, I think taking Istanbul would have gotten the Russians 2 extra victory points at the end of the game. Somewhere on here, the second Rome. Yeah, controlling Istanbul at the end of the game or at the start of the Great War gives Russia 2 victory points. So not only did they have 10 just from their national goal cards, they had 2 more thanks to occupying Istanbul. So when they went to war back in turn 5, which would have been in the 1890s, sometime in the 1890s, they were allied. You can see here they're no longer allied with Bulgaria. I think Germany or somebody ended up taking away their alliance with Bulgaria. And you can see Bosnia became independent at some point, and Austria allied with them. But they initially picked Serbia as a war aim, and they rolled, when you're doing the bots for the Russo-Turkish War, they roll to see if it's going to be a war of conquest or a war of liberation. The first one was a war of liberation, and that was when they liberated Bulgaria. The second Russo-Turkish War was a war of conquest. So they I ended up like randomly picking. No, I think Serbia was the only key that they could choose because they weren't adjacent to any, like it was the closest key that was available to, an allied territory in this case. And then Erzurum was the other key because Russians had an army here. So again, it was and it's not a key rather, but it's a territory. So those were their 2 spaces for their war aims. At the time, the Ottomans also controlled Macedonia. You can see here that Greece has since taken control as a minor power of Macedonia. But at the time, both Ottoman armies were here, and the Arab army was over here defending Erzurum. Well, the Russians destroyed the Arab army defending Erzurum in a decisive battle, so they advanced to Ankara. That put them within reach of Istanbul. Even though Istanbul was not a war aim, the Russians did not have a valid attack on Serbia. There was only one hex one key that they could get to it from. That was through their allies in Bulgaria. The Bulgarian armies would have been evenly matched against the 2 Ottoman armies that were there. The bots won't attack unless they have at least a +1 DRM. So this would have just been a sitting stalemate. But they could attack the capital, which would allow them to win. Now, there's nothing in there, that says the bots will do anything other than attack war aim spaces, but the way I look at it is, if they can't win the war through the warring space, but they could win the war by occupying the enemy's capital, which would immediately end the war and a major victory, they would attack it. So I spent Russian war budget to attack Istanbul. By the time I tried moving, the Ottoman army out of the Serbia space to make it to Istanbul, it was too late. So the Russians, I think there was a fort there in Istanbul at the time that the Russians had to destroy. So they land combat, they attack the fort, they take Istanbul, they win the war. And so this, of course, then ends up letting the Russians control the Serbia key. And I was never entirely clear on the fact that Serbia did not have an LOC to any Russian land spaces. It had to go through Allied spaces, which I don't believe you can run an LOC through Allied spaces in peacetime. So, and I know there's the whole rule down here where, like, Ottomans don't get to count these keys, which you can see they lost those as well. They don't get to count these keys as part of their, territorial keys unless they have a land bridge across Egypt, meaning they have to control Egypt. They can't just be allied with Egypt. Well, they were allied with Egypt for most of the game. I think also until turn 5, when the French declared war. The French removed the Ottoman alliance with Egypt, declared war on Egypt, and nobody else came in. I rolled like a 6 or something for the UK's Sun Never Sets. No, not the Sun Never Sets. Balance of Power card. So they didn't come in. And then I rolled off to see whether any of the bot powers would join. And it's on the Minor Power Alliance table. It was Egypt. Oh yeah, I rolled to see if the Ottomans would come in, and they did not. The same thing when in the second Russo-Turkish War, I did not end up rolling. I rolled again, like higher. It's a 1 or a 2 balance of power will come in. The British will come in on any war that's not one of the German wars using the Bismarck card. And they never did again. I think that was the first Russo-Turkish War that happened in like turn 2 or whatever it was. That was the only time that the British came in on a war. I had another Russo-Turkish War declared after that. I had the Franco-Egypt War that they didn't come in on. And then I had the German-Japanese War. And so that was on the last turn of the game. The Germans had our place in the sun as one of their national goals, which was to have 4 colonial keys, at least one of which must be on the Asia map. Well, by the time they got 3 African colonies from the Berlin Conference card, but they didn't have anything in Asia, and there wasn't anything left in Asia that wasn't, either a British-controlled space or French or Russian-controlled spaces. And you can see here the Russians didn't actually have control of Shandong at the end of the game. They ran out of cards before they could destroy that Boxer army. Same thing happened to the British. So the French were the only ones that still had full control over all their keys in China. But the Germans couldn't get any of these spaces because they would have had to go to war with a major power to do that. And at the time, they were allied with the Russians, so they couldn't do against the Russians. They could have done it against the French. I opted, instead of entangling a major power war and potentially setting up the Great War, I said, well, why don't they just declare war on Japan? We'd had the Meiji Restoration that came in. I don't know when exactly. It's over here with the discarded cards. Maybe around like turn 3 or 4, Japan came into the game. And that allows powers to put diplomacy and alliance chits on them. And I think the Germans had to pull off a diplomacy counter. I forget if the French or might have been one of the bot powers, might have ruled to end up putting out a diplomacy counter. But I recall the Germans pulling a diplomacy counter off of Japan, declared war on them on the last turn, which ironically ended up, it like helped them achieve their unification, or their our place in the sun goal, but blew their stability national goal. So it may have ended up costing them in the long run. They just basically traded 3 points for 3 points because they were at max stability. But when you declare a war of conquest, which they had to do in order to gain control of Japan, that at the time pushed the world tension track up to 3. And so they had to drop their stability by 3 because they were declaring war at a tense time. Of course, they ended up winning the war. By this point, Germany had built a couple of dreadnought squadrons, so they were able to destroy the Japanese fleet that the Japanese get when the Meiji Restoration card comes out. They invaded, did an amphibious invasion with 2 armies, one with an elite corps, and they ended up being only like a +1 differential, but it was enough to get them to destroy the Japanese army and get them control of the space. Now, the game, has those rules around Japan that you can't interact with it in certain ways until the Meiji Restoration card comes out. I didn't see anything about like just declaring war on Japan as you declare war on a minor power, same way the French did with Egypt to gain control of it. So I just did it. As far as I know, that's a valid move. It's just a typical war of conquest on a minor power. No allies came in. Same thing for the Japanese war. I did not roll a 1 or a 2 on the Sun Never, or on Balance of Power, and the minor power table. At the time, it was roll to see which one of these they appeal to. And they appealed to, it was to be the UK, which didn't come in, and then appealed to Russia, but I believe because Germany was allied with Russia at the time, so Russia was not an option to come in on Japan's side. So again, I got lucky with both the Egypt War and the Japan War to not have other major powers come in. So I only ever had one war, that first Russo-Turkish War, where I had multiple great powers involved. And at the time, that was, I think, largely because most of them were neutral, and there wasn't the complication of these alliances that will knock people out from potentially coming in. So the Germans managed to get our place in the sun national goal. They got the unification national goal, which, if I'm reading these right, they get 4 points. They controlled all the German home spaces. You'd only get these, you'd score half of this 4 basically if you controlled 8 or more German home spaces. I don't believe these stack. It wouldn't have made a difference if they did. That would have only put the Germans at 9 victory points, which would still not have been enough to beat the Russians. The British ended up with 3. They only got one of their goals. They were tied for first place for stability, along with Russia and the Ottomans. They did not get the look to London because they didn't have any minor power alliances, and they did not get flashpoints because they only had 1. Germany had 2 flashpoints. France had 3. Russia had 2, and I think that was it on the flashpoints. So the French managed to get France Resurgent, which was to have 6 colonial keys, at least 2 of which should be on the Asia map. Mexico could have counted as 2 keys. I did have an expeditionary force there trying to pacify Mexico, never got around to finishing it. Didn't need to because they had a ton of colonial spaces. I mean, I ran out of influence counters. That's why you can see I have this truce counter here on Tripoli, because France literally ran out of influence and control counters because they had so many in Africa, because they were the ones that played the Berlin Conference, so they get some an extra pick. They had already taken West Africa. They had taken Tunisia from the loose grip card, and then they ended up taking Tripoli and Benghazi from getting the loose grip card again. They ended up taking Egypt. They had a naval base in New Guinea in order to increase their power projection. You can see they were right behind the British on power projection. The British and the French controlled the entire game. Nobody else ever came close on those flashpoints. But they nearly had the 3 keys they needed to control the China flashpoint, but nobody ended up getting it. You had 2 French keys. The French did have Indochina, but you can see that's not part of the China flashpoint. So, or it doesn't appear to be. I suppose it's like right on the edge there. And so I don't know if everything that has a Qing flag in it is part of the China flashpoint or not. If it was, then the French would have had it. They would have had 3 keys in the China flashpoint, so they could have had that card. As it was, the French were blowing everybody away in card draws. I guess they were lucky that the French had fairly low stability for most of the game, because they were already at 4 cards from their industry. They get an extra card for having 6, more than 4 colonial keys. They had the extra card for City of Light. They had the Africa flashpoint, which was 1 card, plus another card for controlling the Suez Canal. So I think like in the last turn of the game, they had like a +1 card counter as well. So they drew like 9 cards. So they were kicking ass on the card draws, but it ended up not translating into victory points for them, because despite having the colonial, Our Place in the Sun, or France Resurgent rather, the France Resurgent goal, they ended up with, they got the City of Light goal, because that was 4 points in the City of Light, but they did not get their Look to Paris, which was have the most minor power alliances. They actually, I don't think, got a single point for that, because they only had 1 minor power alliance, and Russia had 2, Austria had 2, and Germany had 2, meaning that was a 3-way tie for first, meaning it just displaces the other 2 in the ranked rankings, winning to see who wins. There's no tiebreaker. It's just if you have 3 people tied for first, there is no second and third award. Everybody just gets 3 points for being in first, but it eliminates any points for anyone else. So the French, unfortunately, had they allied with Mexico instead of trying to control Mexico, it would have worked out probably better for them. They would have had 2, although I guess a 4-way tie for first everybody would get all 3. I guess that's how that would work. But anyway, it ended up costing the French, so they didn't get their Look to Paris goal, so they came up short. But accomplished most of the goals that I was going for. I should have spent more on diplomacy at the end. Once I had like whatever it was, 10 colonial keys out there for the French. I should have stopped worrying about controlling spaces and focused on diplomacy after that in order to come in first. That would have still left them 2 points short, because the Austrians didn't get any of their national goals. They had contained Prussia. They obviously didn't do that. That was keep Germany from becoming unified. They didn't do that. They didn't have any flashpoints, and they did not have the highest stability, so they didn't get any points. And I don't think there's any victory points for having. They didn't even get all 4. If you get 4 full citizenship, that does something for them. I forget, but I don't think it's victory points. Regardless, they didn't get anything. But Russia managed to accomplish all 3 of the national goals that they drew. They were tied for first with stability, so that was 3 points. Russian hegemony, control 5 European keys that you did not control at the beginning of the game. And that includes the Balkans, and it includes alliances in the Balkans, which was huge. So because they were allied with Romania, they were allied with Serbia, that's 2 keys. Had they still been allied with Bulgaria, that would have been 3, but they didn't need to be allied with Bulgaria because Greece controls 2 keys. They were allied with Greece. That gives them those 2 keys. That's 4. and the control of Istanbul is 5. So they ended up getting the Russian hegemony. Now, you can see here, Russia actually has 18 territorial keys on here. Because they had a couple of keys in the Great Game, they had a couple of keys in China, and they completed the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which gives them 2 more keys. So they were flirting with an auto victory. At one point, they were up to 19, and the loss of control. So I started playing cards like Germany and France started playing cards. Like I played the Polish Revolution card that you can see the Russians have troops stacked there in Poland. So those 2 spaces were in war, and I tried to do it all at once, like to give them, they had to fight this, they had to fight a Qing rebellion in Korea, they had to fight the Boxer rebellion here. I tried to hit all those cards at the same time so that the Russians would just run out of cards trying to deal with it. I just wanted to make sure they didn't get to 20 in the auto victory, because the second that they capture a 20th key, the game ends right then and there, and they win. So Russia was kind of the big bad throughout the game, and I think it's winning those Russo-Turkish wars because the Ottomans never recovered from the first one, and then France was piling on by taking Egypt from them and their other North African claims. Once your manpower gets low enough, it starts to affect how many armies you can have, and you can't have that many armies, then you're a more easy target. Once you're down, it's very hard to get back up again. And so that certainly was the case for the Ottomans, and the Russians were able to benefit from that and kind of almost handily won the game. And the third goal for Russia was the Great War does not occur, which also happened. So they got pretty lucky in their cards, and they got a 4-point one. The Russian hegemony one was huge. Their ability to dominate in the Balkans is a big deal. And they had the Balkan flashpoint fairly early on. They ended up getting the Caucasus flashpoint, so that got an extra card. So Russia doing very well. They did have Nicholas II there, which makes it harder to grant stability, but they were always in 5 and 6. That was one thing, is that with the bots, they don't declare war a lot unless it's through their home cards, so that helps their stability. Both France and Germany declared wars of conquest in the game, and you can see they were not near the top in stability, because if you do it when the world tension track's at 0, then more power to you. But usually you're doing it, it's not going to be at 0, because if you're declaring a war of conquest, the world tension track always goes up, and then you count how much it costs you in stability. So I guess you're always paying at least 1 stability for a war. But the world tension track was low for most of the game, so I was able to do a good job of playing cards that lowered, or getting cards that lowered the world tension. Plus, it always lowers 1 automatically at the end phase of every turn. So, and I got the whatever it is, the National Conference card a couple of times that lowers the world tension track as a mandatory event. So I was fairly lucky in that and staying out of the Great War, which in some ways, it obviously made it for a faster game. On the other hand, it was, if you're wanting to learn this system and learn this game, the Great War is a huge part of the rules. So it kind of would have been nice to actually play through the Great War and see how it ended up working. But I didn't, it is what it is. The Ottomans only got 1 of their national goals. They got the same one the Germans had. Great War does not occur, so that was 3 points. They didn't have any flashpoints, and they did not have an industry level of at least 4. Their industry only ever reached 3. They did industrialize on the last turn. You do, as far as I can tell, still do the end phase on the last turn, so people could still industrialize on the last turn, even though obviously it's not going to help you because there's no more turns to play. So, getting more cards isn't going to help you. But if you do have a national goal that relies on your industrialization reaching a certain number, had the The Ottomans did industrialize. They failed the role. Had they succeeded, they would have gotten those 3 points. So, it would have been enough to win, but it would have put them ahead of the British and the Austrians in terms of victory points, which, surprising because they were just ruined by the end of the game. They had a total of 3 manpower points. By the end of the game, they were down to 3 Ottoman keys. You can see they'd lost 5 of their keys since the start of the game, and we're at was it 5 Arab? They still had the 5 Arab keys, but the Ottoman territory had been completely wrecked by the end of the game. So, yeah, tough game for the Ottomans, and I think that's been one of the. I think there's a thread on Board Game Geek that talks about trying to make a more enjoyable Ottoman experience. I think they have a tough road because the Balkans are such a big focus for the Russians, and because of those Russo-Turkish war cards. It's you want to get into, and maybe with the bots also going to be a different experience because your alliances are coming down to die rolls as opposed to in a game with all players. I think more people would be joining those wars, and it wouldn't be such a cakewalk for the Russians to be able to win them. So, and other thing that didn't happen in the game, Italy never unified. The Austrians continued to frequently have allies with Rome and Naples, thanks to the papal influence card. But the French allied with the Piedmontese, and then they got the Italy card on the last turn of the game, and it ended up probably should have been unified on the last turn, but I failed the rule. The Piedmontese took Rome. That means they had 3 keys, which was like a +3 die roll modifier on the unification roll, but I rolled a 1, so it's like, all right. So they didn't. Italy never unified. It was just a little collection of principalities and stuff, and mostly Piedmontese by the end of the game. So that never happened. The Great Game never resolved. Nobody ever got that flashpoint. The best Russia could do was 2 keys. Eventually, the Graveyard of Empires came out, so it would have been very tough for either the Russians or the Ottomans to pacify Afghanistan. The Ottomans they took Persia. The British had Kuwait, but that was it. Nobody ever got to that third key. And again, the power projection was all England and France the whole game. Germany did increase things by the end there. They had a presence in the Pacific, presence in the Indian Ocean with an East African port there. But again, it was just France and UK. UK started so far ahead, and then France, made it their focus as a player. I was actually playing them, so I was able to make that a focus for them at the end of the game. So, so that was, the state of the board at the end, the unified Germany, a weakened continental France, a France that was not focused on the continent. You can go a whole different route with national goals for France and focus on, Napoleon's legacy, keeping the Second Empire going, and fighting wars against Germany and Austria to collect more European keys. So that's certainly a route that they can take. Otherwise, it's all Africa, focusing on colonies, all Asia, and that's what I focused on. And then, to my chagrin, should have focused more on diplomacy. But again, not enough to stop the Russians. So what do I think of the game? Really, really enjoyed it. It is very much a sandbox of one of the most fascinating areas in history for me, that late Victorian era, early 20th century era, Edwardian, I guess, late Victorian, Edwardian era game. Just am endlessly fascinated by this era of history. Again, pointing back to Pax Britannica as like the ultimate experience of that late Victorian colonial era. This, I think, is a worthy addition to that genre of gaming. And it is, it's a much different game, obviously, than Pax Britannica. It is much, it's much less accounting involved, but it is a very complex game. This game is a very complex game, and I talked about that in one of my earlier videos, how long the rules are, how many moving parts to this thing there are, lots of lookups. This rule book, and it's it's the glossy rules, not the greatest quality. You can see I had this middle page came out, and I had to put some bookbinding tape on here to keep it in place. But yeah, the rules are already getting crinkly and worn from being thumbed through so much. So not the best paper for as much as you're going to be referencing this rule book. A good matte finish, heavy stock paper like the MMP type rule books or the GMT type rule books would have been preferable for this. My guess is that they put all their money into the cards. These are the best cards that you can ask for in a game like this. They're never going to take any damage. They're never going to wear out. They're plastic, essentially. I'm guessing it's like a plastic coated cardstock. I mentioned that Chip Theory Games uses these type of cards. They are indestructible, and they shuffle just a complete dream. They are super flexible, so even with a deck as thick as this, shuffles no problem. So just fantastic card quality, poor rulebook quality. The thick stock cards, great. It's nice to have heavy cards, but they worked terribly. Had to put plexi over them. Defeats the purpose. Might as well just to put them on the same sort of card stock that they used for these, which is again this sort of like plastic coated card stock that's very durable, has a nice texture to it. The cards don't have texture. You can see, I don't know if I can put this under the lights. Yeah, camera's not going to pick up the sort of texture on here, but it has this sort of cross-hatched, linen finish type of texture to it. The cards don't have that. They're perfectly smooth, but again, it's this smooth plastic. There's no chipping the edges of these because again, it's plastic. So just a great durability. If every game had those cards, it would be perfect. So again, really enjoyed it. It is a sandbox game. You are playing in the sandbox of the 1850 to 1920 period of European history. It would be great to play it with the full 6-player contingent, because I feel like you would definitely obviously get a lot more interaction between the great powers. You're just not gonna get that with the bots. You do get some alliance interaction, some joining in wars and stuff, but it would be a lot shadier stuff would be happening all over the map, I think, if everybody was playing. Certainly difficult to manage it solo, just trying to keep track of the power projection, trying to remember where everybody's got stuff going on. I would forget from time to time, like, oh shit, I've got guys over here that I was working on pacifying the space and then got distracted by something over here. It's a lot to keep track of, especially when you're doing it for every single power. Trying to keep all of the national characteristics straight when those are going to come into play. So you're constantly looking at that. If you were only managing one power, I feel like all those things would be much easier to keep track of. But didn't dampen my enjoyment of it at all. It was not overwhelming. It just just had to be diligent and careful, and but still was able to really enjoy the whole experience, and look forward to trying it again with a full contingent of players. So can very highly recommend Imperial Elegy from VUCA Simulations. Again, great things to say about the designer. He's been very active on Board Game Geek, answering every questions, within a matter of hours of them being posted. So he's been very engaged, very frequently updating errata. I think this one that I have, it's from December. He's updated it, I think, just a couple of days ago, as of January, has even more recent updated errata sheet. So, and then people have I printed out a setup sheet over there. The setup can be a little hard to follow, because you've got it on the power cards, but that's not everything you need. So this sort of consolidated setup rules sheet was a pretty handy guide to have on Board Game Geek as well, because it covers all the non-power specific stuff, which isn't always super clear at the beginning of the game. So there's some good player aids out there, good designer support, and just, again, a great experience. So I highly recommend it. If you can find a copy, I understand that at least in the United States, it's sold out, or North America is sold out. I'm not sure if it's still available in Europe or not, but I know they are, I think, already printing a second printing of it. So it may be available again, in the next several months. Because otherwise you're probably going to pay a premium in the secondhand market to get a copy. So, but still, if you can get a copy, definitely do it. Definitely pre-order it from them if they're doing a second printing. I can't really recommend it enough.